I was never supposed to come back here. The Kettle Falls Wilderness Zone had been sealed off for years. The official reason? Unstable terrain, dangerous wildlife, unpredictable weather patterns. A list of convenient excuses crafted by the National Park Service and the government to keep people out. But I knew the truth. People went missing here, and I knew exactly why. I used to be a game warden for the National Park Service, patrolling every inch of these forests. It was supposed to be a peaceful job, monitoring wildlife, checking trail conditions, keeping campers and hikers safe. But something was wrong with Kettle Falls. Even before they shut it down, hikers, campers, and hunters disappeared here more than anywhere else in the state. Entire search parties would comb the area, only to turn up nothing. No bodies, no clothing, no signs of struggle, just gone. Once in a while, they found bones, scattered remains, sometimes picked clean, other times mangled beyond recognition, always stripped of clothing, equipment, or anything that might have identified them. At first they blamed bears, then wolves. Then they stopped blaming anything because the numbers didn't make sense. Over 30 disappearances in the last 15 years. 2003, 4 campers, their tents shredded near the river. Nothing else remained. 2008, a family of 3, father, mother, and a 10-year-old boy. Their truck was still parked at the trailhead, keys in the ignition. The family dog was found whimpering and half-starved near the ranger station 2 weeks later. The family, never seen again. 2012, a lone hunter's backpack was found slashed open near a ridge overlooking the valley. His rifle lay beside it, unfired. His footprints led into the trees, but none came back. And then, 5 years ago, Eli. Eli wasn't just my partner, he was my best friend. We had joined the Park Service around the same time, both eager for a life away from the city, drawn to the isolation and quiet beauty of the job. He was always the one who laughed things off, the one who said the stories were just campfire myths, the one who told me, "Man, you gotta stop scaring yourself with all these legends." And yet, he was the one who didn't come back. The night he vanished, we had been sent to investigate an illegal campsite deep in the restricted zone. A group of college kids had ignored the warnings and ventured into the wrong part of the forest. By the time we arrived, the site was empty. The tents were still there. Campfire long burned out. Food half-eaten, rotting. But the campers, gone. No footprints leading away. No signs of a struggle. Just silence. And then, Eli vanished. 1 second, he was right beside me, gripping his rifle, whispering that something didn't feel right. The next, he was gone. No scream. No sound. Nothing. I searched for hours. Days. I called in every rescue unit we had. We combed through the forest, scoured every ridge, checked the frozen river looking for any trace of him. Nothing. They called it an accident. Said he must have fallen through the ice or gotten lost in the blizzard and succumbed to the cold. But I knew better. And now, after 5 years, I was back to bring him home. The return to Kettle Falls the moment I stepped past the rusted no entry sign. A cold wind slithered through the trees, whispering through the dead pines. The air smelled wrong, not like fresh pine or damp earth. Stale, rotting, metallic, like something had been here long before me and never left. I gripped my rifle tighter. I wasn't alone. The moment I stepped past the no entry sign, everything felt different. The air hung heavy, unnaturally thick and stagnant, as if the wind itself had stopped breathing. No rustling of leaves, no distant calls of birds or chittering of insects, just silence. A deep, unnatural quiet that pressed against me like something waiting. The deeper I went, the colder it became. Not just the crisp chill of an autumn night, but something deeper. A biting, unnatural cold that crept beneath my skin, settling in my bones. By the time I reached the old ranger station, it felt like mid-January instead of late October. My breath curled in thick white clouds, and frost glistened in thin streaks along the brittle grass. The ranger station stood ahead, barely visible through the fog creeping through the trees. I hadn't seen it in 5 years. It looked worse than I remembered. The small wooden structure sat atop a slight hill, its roof sagging, its windows shattered, their glass scattered in sharp fragments along the ground. The porch steps were rotted through. The railing splintered like something had ripped through it with unnatural force. The station's old radio antenna, once standing tall, now lay twisted and broken against the roof. Something had bent it. Not rust, not age. Something. I hesitated at the threshold. The door, once painted a deep forest green, now hung crooked on its hinges, its surface gouged with deep, jagged scratches. Some were old, worn away by time. Others looked fresh, like something had been here recently. I stepped inside. The smell hit me first. Damp wood, mildew, and something else. Something metallic and sour, lingering beneath the dust. The inside of the station was destroyed. Old yellowed maps clung to the wall in tattered sheets, curling at the edges as if scorched. The wooden desk I once sat at was overturned, its drawers pulled out, their contents spilled across the floor. My old logbooks, pens, and empty coffee cups were still there, coated in a thick layer of dust. But the walls were covered in claw marks, deep, jagged gashes, too wide for a bear, too uneven for a blade. Some slashed across the old filing cabinets, carving deep into the rusting metal. My throat tightened. I had seen marks like these before, right before Eli disappeared. I took another step forward, my boots crunching on broken glass. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached the overturned desk, my fingers brushing against its rough surface. And that's when I saw it. Carved into the wood, the letters dug deep as if by something with nails like knives. Still here. I swallowed hard, my breath hitching. That wasn't there before. A sudden snap echoed from outside. I froze, a branch breaking. Something was moving in the trees. I gripped my rifle tighter, my knuckles turning white. Slowly, I turned toward the doorway, scanning the darkness beyond the shattered windows. The night seemed darker, heavier, as if the forest itself was closing in. I stepped back, pressing myself against the wall, my breath shallow, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Silence. Then another crack. Closer this time. My stomach twisted. The feeling of being watched settled over me, heavy and suffocating, like an unseen weight pressing against my chest. I didn't see footprints in the frost. I didn't hear anything breathing. But I could feel it. Watching. Waiting. And I wasn't sure if it was human. I didn't sleep. I tried, closing my eyes, forcing my body to relax against the cold, unforgiving floor of the old ranger station. But the moment my breathing slowed, the sounds began. It started with the wind, howling through the shattered windows, rattling the warped wooden beams like a dying breath exhaling through broken teeth. But underneath it, something else moved, something deep. A low, guttural sound, almost like a voice, but distorted, stretched too thin, carried along the wind in a way that made my skin crawl. It never got closer. It never moved away. It just stayed there, whispering from the darkness outside, as if circling the cabin, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I kept my rifle close, my knuckles aching from how tightly I gripped it. I had spent years in the wilderness, camping in remote areas, patrolling the deepest parts of the park, staying awake through storms and sleepless shifts. But this was different. I had never felt this before, this unnatural, suffocating wrongness. Every shadow in the broken windows felt like it was hiding something. Every gust of wind felt too purposeful, as if it were trying to carry something closer. And then I heard it. A sharp crack outside. A footstep. I sat up fast, rifle aimed at the open doorway, pulse hammering. Nothing. No movement. But the wind had died instantly, as if the entire forest had frozen just to listen with me. I didn't move for a long time. Eventually, the wind picked up again, the whispers fading back into the trees. But I didn't sleep. When morning finally came, I almost thought I had imagined it all. The sounds, the whispers, the thing pacing outside the cabin. But when I stepped outside, the forest had changed. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just cold, empty stillness. Like the entire forest was holding its breath. Then I saw the tracks. At first they looked like deer hooves, but too large, too deep, more weight than any deer should have carried. They moved in an erratic pattern, almost as if whatever made them had been wandering aimlessly, or circling something. And then, mid-stride, they changed. The hoof prints ended abruptly, and in their place, the snow was marked by elongated claw prints pressed deep into the frost like something had risen onto two legs. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Eli and I had found tracks like these before, right before he was taken. The memory flooded back like ice water in my veins. That night, 5 years ago, the burning cold of the wind cutting across our skin, the half-buried tracks in the snow leading into the forbidden section of the forest, and Eli's last words before he stepped too far ahead. Do you hear that? It sounds like it's calling my name. I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the shifting prints, my breath curling into the air in ragged bursts. A part of me wanted to turn back, wanted to pretend I hadn't seen them, that I hadn't felt the watching presence pressing in from the tree line. But I had come too far. If I left now, I'd never get the chance again. I adjusted my grip on the rifle and pressed deeper into the woods. Eli and I had discovered the cave system years ago during a routine patrol in the lower valley, where the terrain dipped into a frozen gorge. We hadn't been looking for it. In fact, the entrance had been almost impossible to see, tucked behind a jagged rock formation along the base of the ridge, half buried beneath the tangled remains of fallen trees. It was Eli who spotted it first. "That doesn't look natural," he had said, his breath fogging in the cold. We had spent over an hour clearing the entrance, breaking apart ice-crusted branches and rolling aside heavy stones. Beneath it, the mouth of the cave gaped like a wound, curling inward into impenetrable blackness. The deeper we went, the colder it became. Even back then, I had noticed it, that unnatural chill, the way the air inside the cave seemed to absorb sound, swallowing our footsteps, leaving only the hollow echo of our breathing. We had found bones near the back of the cavern. Animal bones, we told ourselves. But even then, something about them had felt wrong. I remember running my gloved fingers over the skulls, noticing how they had been split open, the marrow hollowed out. Eli had made a joke about mountain lions or bears, but there were no bears this far down in the valley. Neither of us said it aloud, but we both felt it. The weight of something unseen pressing against our skin. The creeping sensation that we were not supposed to be here. That had been 5 years ago, and now I was back. The entrance was larger now, the frozen ground uneven, as if something had tunneled deeper inside over the years. The jagged rock formations that had once hidden the cave's mouth were now pushed aside, the earth around them disturbed. I hesitated at the threshold. The air around me was unnaturally cold. Frost curled along the stone, spreading like veins beneath the surface, despite the temperature outside being well above freezing. I could feel it again. That same unnerving presence Eli and I had felt all those years ago. But this time, it felt stronger. Something lived down there. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. The stench hit me first. Thick, pungent decay that made my stomach churn. It was the kind of rot that lingers, clinging to the inside of your nostrils, making every breath taste foul. I tightened my grip on my flashlight, lifting it higher as I stepped deeper inside. The cave was massive, far bigger than I remembered. The rocky walls curved in unnatural formations, jagged in some places, smoothed in others, as if something had scraped them clean. Thick patches of frozen moss clung to the stone, their icy tendrils stretching like veins across the floor. The deeper I went, the colder it became. Then the light caught something. Bones, scattered across the cavern floor, some half buried in the ice, others piled together in eerie clusters. My breath hitched. There were so many. Skulls, animal and human alike. Some picked clean, others still wrapped in remnants of frozen flesh. Long femurs, snapped in half like twigs, their marrow hollowed out. I took a step forward. Crunch. My boot pressed against something brittle. I looked down. Teeth. Dozens of them. Scattered like fallen pebbles, glistening under the flashlight's beam. My hands shook as I swept the light across the walls. Markings, claw marks, long and deep, dug into the rock with something far stronger than human hands. And beneath them, symbols. I didn't recognize the language. They were burned into the stone, blackened like they had been carved with fire instead of tools. Jagged spirals, interlocking loops, some forming twisted, distorted figures that almost looked human. Almost. I swallowed hard. This place had never been a simple cave. It was a den. A place where something lived and fed. Then I saw it. In the center of the room, partially buried beneath a pile of frozen remains. A rib cage split open like a broken cage. A human skull cracked along the sides, deep gouges carved into the bone, as if something had crushed it in its grip. And beside it, sticking out from the ice, a sleeve, torn, stiff with frost. My knees nearly gave out. It was Eli's jacket. I stumbled forward, yanking at the frozen fabric, my hands burning from the cold. He had been here. He had died here. But if that was true, where was his body? I turned sharply, my heart hammering. And that's when I saw the tunnel. It was carved into the ice, stretching deep into the cavern's depths, as if something had dragged something heavy inside. A sickening realization settled in my gut. I wasn't alone down here, and whatever was waiting in the dark, it wasn't done yet. I should have left. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn back, to run, to get out before it was too late. But I didn't. I followed the tunnel, my rifle gripped tight, my pulse hammering so hard in my ears that I could barely hear my own footsteps. The air grew colder with every step, not just the cold of deep caves, not the damp chill of underground air. This was something else. A suffocating, unnatural emptiness. A biting frost that seeped through my layers and sank into my bones. The tunnel curved and opened into a massive cavern, its walls lined with thick icicles, jagged like teeth, hanging low enough that they seemed to be waiting to snap shut. And then, I heard it, the breathing, a low, hollow inhale, drawn out like something starving, slow, deep, wrong. Something shifted in the shadows ahead, the darkness stirring as if it had a life of its own. Then, the thing stepped into the light, and I saw it. It stood tall, too tall, hunched slightly but still towering, its elongated limbs unnaturally thin. Its skin was pale and mottled, stretched too tight over its skeletal frame. Bones jutted out from its chest, its ribs like a cage, threatening to tear through. Its arms were too long, the fingers ending in clawed, bony talons, sharp enough to rip through meat and bone alike. And its face, my breath caught in my throat. It had Eli's face, or what was left of it. The skin was stretched and blackened, frostbitten and split in places, revealing dark tissue underneath. The lips had peeled back, exposing jagged, too long teeth. Some cracked, some broken. Its eyes were black pits, hollow sockets that seemed to suck the light from the room, dragging it inward like a bottomless void. It stared at me, head twitching slightly as if it was trying to remember how to move like a human. Then, it smiled. A slow, unnatural pull of Eli's frozen lips, stretching too wide, teeth clacking as the thing tilted its head. The voice that came next was not human. It was distorted, stretched, a hollow echo of something that had forgotten how to speak. Hunter. My stomach lurched. It had taken him, and now it was wearing him. I ran, not in a controlled, tactical retreat. I ran like a man who knew he was about to die. The moment the Wendigo shrieked, the air itself seemed to shatter, vibrating, splintering, warping. It wasn't just a scream. It was wrong, hollow, a wretched distortion of sound, as if something was trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. The tunnel walls shook, loose ice splintering from the ceiling, cascading down in jagged shards. I didn't stop. The sound of bones creaking filled the cavern, followed by a wet, rasping inhale. The Wendigo was moving, lurching forward, its elongated claws scraping along the rock walls. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my blood turned to ice. It was crawling on all fours now, faster than it had any right to be. Its twisted limbs bent at impossible angles, its black eyes locked onto me. And then, it mimicked Eli's voice. A single echoing scream, distorted, warped, but I recognized it. Eli's final scream, the sound of him being taken. My chest tightened with terror. My breath came in ragged bursts as my boots slid over the ice, barely keeping balance. The cave walls blurred around me. I could hear it getting closer. Too close. I threw myself around the final bend of the tunnel, lungs burning, heart slamming against my ribs like a caged animal. The light of the cave entrance was ahead, just a few yards more. Then, the Wendigo lunged. I felt it before I saw it, the cold, inhuman air shifting behind me. The presence of something massive and starving reaching for me with elongated claws. At the last possible second, I dived forward. A gust of freezing wind brushed against the back of my neck. Its claws swiped inches from my head. I hit the ground hard, rolling over the icy rocks, just as I burst out of the cave's mouth. The silence and the world went silent. Too silent. I scrambled to my feet, my rifle raised, breath hitching in my throat. The forest beyond the cave was unnaturally still. No wind, no rustling leaves, no distant howls of animals in the night. It was as if the entire world had gone quiet. Watching, waiting. The Wendigo should have chased me. It should have burst through the cave opening, should have hunted me into the trees, tearing after me with its endless, hunger-driven sprint. But it didn't. It stopped. I turned, my body rigid with terror, rifle aimed at the cave mouth. Nothing. The darkness inside the cavern was absolute, unmoving, like a portal into somewhere else. Then a whisper right behind me. "Hunter." A hot, rotted breath rolled down my neck. I wasn't alone. I spun and fired blindly, my ears ringing as the gunshot cracked through the trees. The muzzle flash briefly lit up the darkness, revealing nothing but shifting shadows. It was gone. No body, no sign of a hit. It had vanished. I didn't know whether I'd missed, or if the bullet had simply done nothing at all. But I knew one thing for certain. It was toying with me. A low rustling echoed between the trees, too soft to pinpoint, but always close enough to remind me it was there. It wasn't chasing me outright. It was hurting me, leading me somewhere. I took one slow step backward, my breath fogging in the cold air. The rifle trembled in my hands. Then, I noticed it. The second set of tracks, not mine, not the Wendigos. Someone else had been here. Recently. The tracks were wider, heavier, the imprint still fresh in the frozen dirt. They led away from the cave, but not in random directions. They led toward something. I turned my flashlight downward, tracing the path. And then, my stomach dropped. A trap. A deep pit dug into the earth, lined with sharpened stakes, the kind meant to kill anything that fell in instantly. It was covered, barely. A thin layer of branches and dirt, arranged just carefully enough to disguise the drop beneath. The Wendigo had been leading me straight into it, and I had been seconds from falling in. I took a sharp step back, my pulse hammering against my skull. Someone had set this. Someone else had been hunting it. Or maybe they had been hunting me. I had seconds to decide, run or fight. I dropped to the ground, my body hitting the frozen dirt just as the Wendigo lunged. A blur of rotting flesh and twisting limbs passed inches over me, its claws slicing through my jacket like a razor through fabric. I barely had time to react before thud. My shoulder slammed against the frozen ground, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. I rolled, gasping, scrambling to get my footing as my rifle skidded across the icy forest floor, stopping just out of reach. The Wendigo landed hard, its elongated limbs twitching, its movements jerky, unnatural, like a marionette being controlled by unseen strings. Then, slowly, it rose to its full height, each vertebrae snapping into place with a sickening series of pops. The thing's blackened eyes locked onto mine. It was grinning. Not a human grin. Something too wide, too stretched, lips peeling back to reveal jagged, rotting teeth, some broken, others needle-sharp. I reached for my rifle, but the Wendigo took a step forward. Then, it spoke, not in Eli's voice, not this time. Its voice was deep, hollow, layered with something unnatural, like multiple voices speaking at once. "You came back for him." It shambled forward, its claws twitching. "Now you stay." A cold wave of fear slammed through me. I lunged for the rifle, my fingers wrapping around the stock just as the creature moved. It pounced. I had one shot. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I raised the rifle, aimed directly between those black abyssal eyes, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot ripped through the air, the explosion of sound deafening in the dead silent forest. The bullet slammed into its skull. For a fraction of a second, the Wendigo froze, its body going rigid, its mouth hanging open in a soundless scream. Then, a sickening wet sound. Blackened blood splattered across the snow, steaming in the freezing air. The thing staggered, twitching violently, its limbs convulsing as if its body didn't understand it was already dead. It took a shaky step forward, reaching out, its claws nearly brushing my face. Then it collapsed. The moment it hit the ground, the forest went silent, not just quiet, dead. The kind of silence that makes your ears ring. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just stared at the thing's motionless body, waiting for it to get up again, waiting for it to lunge at me one last time. But it didn't. Slowly, my shaking hands lowered the rifle. I took a step back, then another. The air around me felt different, lighter, as if something had been lifted. Or maybe something had just been waiting for this moment. I swallowed hard. Then, with one final look at the twisted, unnatural corpse, I turned and I ran. I had survived, or so I thought. The forest was silent, the kind of deep, unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. No wind, no rustling branches, just the sound of my own ragged breathing as I pushed through the frozen wilderness. I had no idea how long I had been walking. The sun had barely shifted in the sky. Time felt stretched, distorted, as if the forest itself refused to let me go. Every few steps I found myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see something moving between the trees. A shadow, a shifting figure, something that wasn't supposed to be there, but there was nothing. Just the endless, twisted trees and the heavy weight of the mountain pressing down on me. I gritted my teeth and kept going. By the time I reached the rusted no entry sign, my body ached from exhaustion, my breath forming sharp white clouds in the cold air. I finally stopped, leaning against the decaying wood, letting my pulse slow. That's when I felt it, a sharp, throbbing pain in my arm. I looked down, and my stomach lurched. 3 long gashes tore through my sleeve, the fabric soaked with blood, edges darkened where the skin had split open. I didn't even remember it happening. Maybe in the struggle inside the cave, maybe when I had dropped to the ground to dodge its claws. But it didn't matter. A wave of nausea rolled through me, the wound burning like ice beneath my jacket. I pressed my gloved fingers against it, wincing at the raw, stinging pain. I forced myself to breathe. It didn't matter. I was still alive. I needed to get out of here. I stepped forward, and that's when I heard it. A sound so faint I almost thought I imagined it. A breath, a low, rattling inhale from somewhere deep in the woods behind me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned slowly. The trail I had just walked was empty. The trees stood still, their skeletal branches stretching toward the sky, casting twisting shadows over the snow. But something was there, something I couldn't see. I gripped my rifle, my fingers so tight around the stock that my knuckles ached. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me. If anything, it had gotten stronger. I took a step back, then another. The forest around me felt wrong, the air thick and heavy, pressing down on my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I exhaled slowly, my breath curling in the air. And then, just beyond the tree line, something shifted. A whisper of movement in the snow. I didn't stay to see what it was. I turned and ran. The hunter waits. I didn't stop until I saw the first signs of civilization. An old utility road, the one leading to the ranger station miles away. Only then did I allow myself to breathe. But the feeling never left me. Even as I stepped onto that road, even as I left the forest behind, I could still feel it. Something waiting in the trees. Something that knew my name. I had escaped. For now. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Click the bell icon so you never miss any new content. Stay tuned for more creepy stories coming soon. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the dark, subscribe for more. Because the best horror isn't what you hear, it's what follows when the story is over.